Rain was falling outside Berea, Kentucky, when a former Navy SEAL heard a tiny cry from a roadside box. Inside was a young German shepherd, soaked, shaking, and too afraid to trust even a warm hand. Judson Marsh thought he was only saving a lost dog that night. But Piper kept crying, kept searching, and kept reacting to a scent no one understood. Her fear would lead Judson back to a place his own father had tried to expose 22 years earlier. What was buried beneath an old barn floor would not just uncover a cover-up. It would give one wounded family a final chance to come home. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. The old woodworking shop stood at the edge of Berea, Kentucky, where the town's last porch lights gave up and the dark woods began their patient breathing. By day, the building looked almost harmless. Weathered cedar boards, a sagging tin roof, one narrow chimney coughing smoke into the pale blue mornings. There was a hand-painted sign above the front door that read, Marsh Woodworks, though most of the gold paint had peeled away, leaving only the ghost of a business that had once expected customers to walk in. No customers walked in anymore. Judson Marsh preferred it that way. At 43, he had the body of a man built for carrying weight he never spoke about. He stood 6'1", broad through the shoulders, thick in the neck, with the hard, functional strength of someone who had spent his life climbing, lifting, bracing, surviving. His face was square and sun-browned, the jaw cut sharp beneath 2 or 3 days of dark stubble. His hair, nearly black except for a few silver threads at the temples, was clipped short at the sides and left heavier on top, usually pushed back by one impatient hand. A thin scar marked the end of his right eyebrow, so small most people missed it. His eyes were harder to miss, deep blue-gray, direct, tired at the lower lids, as if sleep had once been a country he had been exiled from. He had been a Navy SEAL once. People in town still said that in low voices, as though the title were a sleeping animal. Judson never corrected them, never encouraged them, never gave stories to men at the diner who wanted war polished into legend over black coffee. He had spent years entering dark rooms, reading corners, trusting silence, learning that a closed door was never simply a door. Now he lived behind one. The shop smelled of oak dust, machine oil, rain-soaked lumber, and coffee left too long on the stove. Judson made tables, cabinets, rocking chairs, porch steps, church donation boxes, anything people asked for through notes, phone messages, or envelopes slipped under the front door. He delivered finished work at odd hours, before sunrise, after dusk, during football games, during church. Any time when he could leave a piece on a porch and avoid a conversation. He wore the same sort of clothes every day. A dark charcoal t-shirt fitted tight across his shoulders, brown work pants faded at the knees, scuffed boots, and a black tactical watch with scratches across the face. The old Navy part of him liked routine. The broken civilian part liked that routine asked no questions. Some men ran from the law, some ran from debt, from drink, from women, from God. Judson Marsh ran from dinner tables. He had not always been alone. There had been a house on a rural road outside town, a mother named Elaine who put too much butter in cornbread because she believed grief needed feeding, and a father named Caleb who had once served Madison County as a veterinary inspector. Caleb had been a quiet, principled man, the kind who cleaned his boots before walking into his own kitchen and wrote notes in the margins of everything he read. He and Judson had never been soft with each other, but there had been love between them. Plain, stubborn, practical love, like a fence post hammered deep into Kentucky clay. Then came the 4th of July dinner. It had been years ago, not long after Judson came home for good. Elaine had made chicken, beans, cornbread, and a peach cobbler she kept warm under foil. Caleb had asked about work. Judson had answered in short pieces, trying to be normal, trying to make his hands rest flat on the table instead of measuring exits, shadows, window reflections. Then fireworks cracked somewhere down the road. Not far, not loud enough to scare most men, but loud enough. The room folded in on him. The kitchen light went white. The scrape of a chair became something else. Judson stood too fast, knocked the table hard with his hip, sent plates sliding, glasses breaking, Elaine gasping. Caleb rose and reached for him, not angry, not ashamed, only trying to bring his son back into the room. But Judson saw his father's face through the smoke of his own panic and mistook pain for disappointment. That was the lie that became his gospel. "I bring trouble home." He left before dessert. After that, he stopped answering calls. He skipped Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays. Elaine still mailed cards every year, pale blue envelopes with his name written in her careful hand. Judson kept them in a drawer near his chisels, unopened, as if paper could forgive him only if he never asked it to. The town learned not to expect much from him. He was polite when cornered, paid his bills in cash, fixed a church pew once and refused payment, helped an old man load fence boards without saying more than 6 words. Some called him proud, some called him damaged. A few kinder souls said he was just private, which was how small towns wrapped loneliness in a clean towel. Judson did not mind what they called him. Names were easier than belonging. On the night he found Piper, rain came down cold and slanted, turning the roadside gravel silver under his headlights. Judson had driven into town for screws, wood glue, and a replacement blade for the table saw. He waited until the hardware store was nearly closed before going in, nodded once to the teenage cashier, and left without small talk. The road back to the shop curved past dark pastures and a stretch of cedar trees. His wipers dragged water across the windshield in tired arcs. The heater clicked. The bag of hardware shifted on the passenger seat. Then he heard it. A thin sound. Almost not a sound at all. Judson slowed. At first he thought it was the belt in the engine or wind catching some loose piece of metal. But the noise came again, high and broken, from the ditch near a leaning mailbox. He pulled over. Rain tapped against his shoulders as he stepped out. He stood still for a moment, listening the way he had once listened outside unfamiliar doors. Not fear, not hesitation. Assessment. The old habit rose in him, clean and cold. There. Beside the road, half hidden in weeds, sat a wet cardboard box. Judson crouched. The box shivered. "Easy," he said, though he did not yet know who he was saying it to. Inside was a puppy. Not much more than a bundle of bones, mud, and trembling breath. A young German shepherd, maybe 8 or 10 months old, though hunger made her look smaller. Her coat was sable dark, black along the back like a streak of coal, with brown-gray flanks and a small white mark on her chest, shaped almost like a falling drop of milk. Her muzzle was black. Her eyes were amber and too old for her face. One ear stood upright, the other bent slightly at the tip, giving her a look of permanent, worried listening. A frayed piece of soft cord hung loose near her neck. No tag, no collar, no name. When Judson reached in, the puppy shrank back so hard the box scraped against the ditch stones. He stopped. Rain ran down his jaw. His knees protested the crouch. The old world inside him, the one that knew how to breach, clear, command, stood useless before a creature that weighed less than a duffel bag and trusted nothing. All right, he murmured. No grabbing. He took off his canvas jacket and laid it open near the box. Then he sat back on his heels in the rain and waited. The puppy stared at him. Judson stared at the road. It would have been funny if anyone had been there to see it. A former SEAL losing a negotiation to a half-starved dog in a ditch. 5 minutes passed. Maybe 10. At last, the puppy stretched one paw onto the edge of the jacket. Then another. Her legs shook as if the earth itself were uncertain. When she stepped fully onto the canvas, Judson gathered the jacket around her slowly, not trapping, only shielding. She whimpered once, a sound so thin it seemed made of rainwater and thread. "Piper," he said suddenly. The name came from nowhere, or maybe from that little whistle of a cry, like a pipe flute heard across a field. It did not sound like a warrior's name. It sounded like something small trying to call the world back to kindness. "Piper," he repeated. "All right, let's get you warm." Back at the shop, he carried her inside and kicked the door shut against the weather. The building swallowed them in amber light. Tools hung in rows along the wall. Boards leaned in patient stacks. The old iron stove glowed red at its belly, keeping winter at a respectful distance. Piper shook in his jacket while he warmed water on the stove. He found an old towel, then another, then the wool navy blanket he had not used in years. He hesitated before spreading it near the stove. The blanket was dark blue, folded military neat despite its age. It had followed him from base housing to storage units to this shop, a relic of a life he had tried to set down and somehow kept within arm's reach. He had never let anyone else touch it. Piper sneezed. Judson looked at the blanket, then at the dog. "Don't get sentimental," he muttered to himself, and laid the blanket out. He dried her gently, expecting her to bite. She did not. She flinched when his hand passed near her ears, trembled when the stove popped, but she did not bite. He mixed warm water with a little soft food from a can he had bought months ago for a stray cat that never returned. Piper sniffed it, backed away, then crept forward and ate in tiny, desperate mouthfuls, as though expecting the bowl to vanish between breaths. Judson turned his face away. There were things a man could look at directly, and things that required mercy. Later, he cleaned the workbench, not thinking much of it. He poured a little disinfectant onto a rag, the sharp medicinal smell rising through the warm air. Piper froze. The change was immediate. Her body lowered. Her ears pinned back. The half-bent tip of the right ear flattened completely. She retreated beneath the work table, nails clicking against the floorboards, and began to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, but with a small, strangled rhythm that made Judson set the bottle down as if it had burned him. "Hey," he said softly. "It's just cleaner." Piper pressed herself against the wall. Judson looked at the bottle, looked at the dog. Then, without another word, he capped it, carried it outside into the rain, and set it on the far side of the porch. When he came back in, he opened both windows despite the cold and let the smell bleed out into the night. He did not know what had happened to her. He did not want to imagine too much. He had learned in his own life that fear did not always come with a story attached. Sometimes the body remembered what the mind could not bear to organize. Sometimes a smell was enough, a light, a sound, a hand reaching too fast. He sat on the floor 10 feet from the work table and waited again. Piper watched him from the shadows. The shop clock ticked. Rain whispered down the gutters. The stove breathed. After a long while, the puppy crawled forward, inch by inch, and placed one paw on the toe of his boot. Judson did not move. It was the smallest trust in the world. It felt heavier than any metal he had ever seen. Near midnight, Piper finally slept for 20 minutes, curled on the navy blanket with her nose tucked under her tail. Judson sat in a chair nearby, elbows on knees, hands loose between them. Every time the stove cracked, Piper twitched. Every time wind pushed at the door, her eyes opened. Judson knew that kind of sleep. He also knew the shame of being watched while having it. So he turned his chair slightly away, giving her the dignity of not being studied. The night deepened. The rain slowed. Somewhere outside, water dripped from the roof into a metal bucket with a hollow, patient sound. Judson made coffee he did not need and stared at the drawer where Elaine's unopened cards rested under a box of brass screws. He thought of the kitchen, the broken glass, his mother's startled face, his father's hand reaching out. He had spent years believing leaving was a form of protection. Maybe that was the most cowardly kind of pride, calling absence a gift. A soft scrape interrupted him. Judson looked up. Piper was awake. She stood near the back of the shop, her thin body outlined by the low light from the stove. For a moment she seemed uncertain where she was. Then her head turned toward the old storage shed attached to the rear of the building. A narrow, half-forgotten space Judson used for warped boards, paint cans, and things he meant to fix someday. The door to the shed was closed. Piper approached it slowly. "Piper," Judson said. She did not look back. The puppy lowered her nose to the crack beneath the door. She sniffed once, then again. Her body tightened. Not the frozen terror of the disinfectant. Something different. Recognition, maybe. Confusion. A question carried in scent. Then she lifted one paw and scratched lightly at the floorboards. Once. Twice. The sound was so small it nearly disappeared beneath the dripping roof. Judson rose, careful not to startle her. Nothing back there but junk. Piper scratched again, then stopped and looked over her shoulder. Her amber eyes caught the stove light. In them was no command, no miracle, no answer. Only a plea so quiet it seemed older than language. Judson stood in the middle of his shop, surrounded by wood he could measure, cut, sand, and join. He understood grain, pressure, weight. He understood how to repair a cracked chair leg, how to square a frame, how to make warped boards useful again. But this little dog had brought him something no tool could fix. A door inside the night. And she wanted him to notice it. He did not open the shed. Not then. Piper was trembling again, and the hour was too late for ghosts, even the small four-legged kind. Judson only crouched beside her and rested his hand palm up on the floor. After a moment, Piper stepped close enough to touch her nose to his knuckles. "That's enough for tonight," he whispered. But when he carried her back to the blanket, she kept looking toward the closed shed door. Long after Piper finally drifted into uneasy sleep, Judson remained awake, listening to the rain fade from the roof, wondering how a creature he had found in a ditch had made his shop feel less empty and more haunted at the same time. By morning, he would tell himself she was only frightened. By morning, he would almost believe it. By morning, Berea had already begun doing what small towns did best. It whispered. Judson heard the first pieces of it before he ever opened the front door. A pickup slowed on the road outside the shop, then rolled on. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a siren moaned once and faded. His old radio, left on low beside a stack of walnut boards, carried the voice of a local announcer trying to sound calm while clearly enjoying the privilege of being first. Authorities confirmed early this morning that Madison County deputies, assisted by an animal rescue team, executed a warrant at a licensed breeding facility outside Berea. Judson reached over and shut the radio off. The shop fell back into its usual sounds. The stove ticking, rainwater dripping from the eaves, Piper breathing unevenly from the navy blanket near the hearth. She had not slept much. Neither had he. The puppy lay curled in a shape too small for her legs, her sable coat still rough in places where mud had dried into stubborn patches. In the warmer light of morning, Judson could see her more clearly. She was no tiny pup, not exactly. 8 or 10 months, maybe. Young enough to be all elbows and oversized paws, old enough that the German Shepherd shape was beginning to declare itself. The long muzzle, the dark saddle along her back, the amber eyes that watched everything with wounded intelligence. Her right ear, the one with the bent tip, twitched when gravel crunched outside. Judson turned before the knock came. Not because he expected danger, because expecting nothing had never been a skill he learned. 3 firm knocks landed on the front door. Piper lifted her head and tucked her paws under her chest. Not running, not yet. Judson looked through the narrow side window. A Madison County Sheriff's cruiser sat outside, rain-speckled and dusty. Beside it was a white veterinary rescue van with paw print magnets on the doors. A woman in a tan deputy's uniform stood on the porch, hat in one hand, black hair pulled low at the nape of her neck. Beside her waited another woman in a gray-green utility jacket, carrying a soft medical bag instead of a badge. Judson opened the door halfway. The deputy did not lean in. That earned her 1 point. "Mr. Marsh," she said. "I'm Deputy Lena Ortiz, Madison County Sheriff's Office." Her voice was steady, not sweetened for comfort and not sharpened for authority. Late 30s, maybe. Olive brown skin, dark eyes that did not wander around the shop looking for weakness. There was rain on her shoulder and a silver pen clipped neatly to her front pocket. Judson said nothing. Lena accepted the silence as if she had budgeted for it. "This is Dr. Mara Whitcomb. She works with Bluegrass Animal Rescue and runs a veterinary clinic outside town." Mara lifted 2 fingers in a small greeting. She looked tired in the honest way of people who had already been awake for hours, doing necessary things no camera cared about. Her light brown hair was caught in a crooked clip, and the pocket of her jacket bulged with gauze, treats, and too many pens. Her eyes moved once toward Piper, then away again, careful not to stare. "We're not here to take her from you," Mara said. Judson's gaze shifted to her. Mara gave a faint, sad smile. That's usually the first fear. Behind Judson, Piper made a low, uncertain sound. Lena glanced past him, but did not step forward. "We have reason to believe the dog you found may have come from a breeding facility we served a warrant on this morning. We're trying to account for several animals that were moved or went missing before we arrived." Judson's hand tightened on the edge of the door. Moved by who? "We're still determining that." It was an answer trained to walk on thin ice. Judson recognized those. He looked from the deputy to the vet, then back at Piper. The puppy had risen to her feet now, her tail low, her amber eyes fixed on the strangers. One paw rested on the dark blue blanket, gripping it slightly, as if the blanket were a piece of earth she trusted more than the floor. Judson opened the door wider. "Don't crowd her," he said. Lena nodded once. Mara stepped in first, slowly, stopping just inside the door as if the line mattered. She let Piper look at her. Let the shop breathe around them. There was no rush in her body, which Judson noticed more than any credential she could have shown him. "She has a name?" Mara asked. "Piper." The puppy blinked at the sound. Mara's smile softened. Good name. Judson almost said he had not meant to keep her. He did not say it, because the lie was too young to stand. Lena remained near the workbench, eyes taking in the shop with professional restraint. Table saw, clamps, stacked lumber, coffee mug, old stove, back door, storage shed. Judson had known plenty of people who entered rooms like thieves and plenty who entered them like judges. Lena entered like someone responsible for remembering details later. Mara crouched sideways several feet from Piper and opened her bag. She did not reach for the dog. Instead, she placed a folded towel on the floor, then a small bowl of water, then a bit of soft food on a paper plate. Piper stared at the food. Judson gave a low whistle, barely sound at all. Go ahead. The puppy looked at him first. Only then did she creep toward the plate and take a bite. Mara watched without touching. She trusts you. Judson frowned. She ate food. She looked at you for permission. That small sentence landed somewhere Judson had not guarded. He turned away and busied himself with a log near the stove. Mara waited until Piper had eaten before beginning the exam. She spoke in a low, continuous murmur. Not baby talk, not pity. Just a quiet river of sound. She checked the puppy's gums, skin, paws, ears, hydration. Piper flinched at first, then tolerated the hands, especially when Judson stood within reach. She's underweight, Mara said. Dehydrated, but not dangerously if she keeps drinking. A few superficial scratches, already drying. No obvious major injury. Judson's jaw worked once. Mara glanced up at him. That's good news, Mr. Marsh. Judson. All right, Judson. Lena took out a small notebook. Where exactly did you find her? County Road near the old Beasley mailbox, west of here. Around 9:30 last night. Box? Cardboard, wet, no markings I saw. Anyone nearby? No. Vehicle tracks? Judson looked at her. Lena paused, pen lifted. Sorry, habit. There were tire marks. Could have been anyone. Rain had softened the shoulder. You noticed tread? Wide rear tires. Maybe truck. Nothing clean enough to swear to. Lena studied him for half a second, and he saw the calculation happen. Not suspicion. Reassessment. You still notice a lot? She said. I try not to. Mara had moved to Piper's chest, gently parting the fur. She has a small white mark here, like a teardrop. That may help identify her. She checked the inside of the ear, but found no tattoo. No microchip scanner came out yet. She seemed determined not to turn the dog into evidence before earning the right to touch her. Outside, another vehicle passed slowly, tires hissing on wet pavement. Berea's whispers were growing legs. Lena closed her notebook. The facility is called Bright Ridge Working Shepherds, licensed as a breeder of German Shepherds and Belgian Malinois. Website looked immaculate. Testimonials, family photographs, puppies in red bows. Judson looked down at Piper. The puppy had retreated to his boot and placed one paw over the toe. Lena's face remained controlled, but not empty. We've had complaints for months. Some from buyers, some from neighbors, some anonymous. Every time an inspection was scheduled, something delayed it. Or the place looked prepared before anyone arrived. Prepared, Judson repeated. Mara's mouth tightened. Overcleaned, rearranged. Animals temporarily moved. Records suddenly perfect. It happens. She reached into her bag for a small sealed wipe to clean her hands. As soon as she cracked the packet, a sharp medicinal scent slipped into the room. Piper bolted. Not far. Only beneath the work table. But the movement was so fast, so complete, it cut the air in half. Her body flattened against the wall. A faint whine rose from her throat. Mara froze. Judson crossed the room, not toward Piper, but toward Mara's hand. "Close it." Mara sealed the wipe inside another bag immediately. "Done." The scent still hung there, thin and bright. Piper trembled beneath the table. No one spoke. Lena's pen lowered slowly. Mara backed away and sat on the floor, giving Piper distance. "That's the same class of disinfectant smell we noticed at the facility this morning," she said, her voice quieter now. "Very strong. Too strong. It can be used properly, of course. But when animals associate it with stress, transport, bright lights, noise, the smell alone can bring the fear back." Judson crouched several feet from the table. "Piper." The puppy's eyes shone in the shadow. He placed his palm flat on the floor, exactly as he had the night before. Not reaching, not asking too much. Lena watched that gesture, and for a moment her official manner cracked just enough to reveal the human underneath. "Mr. Judson, I know this is not your problem." Judson did not look away from Piper. "People keep saying that right before it becomes one." Piper crawled forward an inch. Mara saw it and did not move. Lena did not write. The room seemed to hold its breath around the little dog, making one impossible decision: whether a floor that had frightened her could also carry her back to safety. At last, Piper came out from under the table and pressed against Judson's knee. He rested one hand near her shoulder, not quite touching until she leaned into it herself. Lena's voice softened. "We're trying to find out where she came from. Also how much was hidden, and who helped hide it." That was the moment Judson understood the visit had two doors. One led to a rescued dog. The other led somewhere older, cleaner on the outside, rotten behind the paneling. He knew doors like that. He had spent half his life opening them. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Lena did not answer too quickly. Another point. "For now, permission to document that she's here. Photos of identifying marks. Mara can scan for a microchip if Piper tolerates it. I'd also like a written statement about where you found her. And after that?" Lena's eyes shifted briefly toward the back of the shop, where the old storage shed door stood closed. "After that depends on what the records show." Judson followed her glance, but she had not meant anything by it. Not yet. Piper, however, had. At the sight of the rear door, the puppy's body tightened again. She did not bark. She did not cry. She simply stared at the narrow crack beneath it, as if something on the other side had breathed her name. Mara noticed too. "Did she do that before?" "Last night." "What's back there?" "Scrap wood, old paint, things I haven't fixed." The sentence sounded ordinary until Judson heard himself say it. "Things I haven't fixed." Lena's phone buzzed. She stepped toward the porch to answer, speaking low. Judson caught only fragments. "Yes, Sheriff. No, not making claims. Yes, I know Mr. Vance called." The name made Mara's eyes flicker. Judson caught it. "Vance?" Mara exhaled through her nose. "Harold Vance. County Licensing Office. He oversees agricultural and animal facility permits. Very polished man. The kind who says process so often you start wondering what he's sweeping under it." Lena came back inside, expression flatter than before. "Mr. Vance is already telling people this may be a paperwork misunderstanding." Judson gave a humorless half-breath. "Fast paperwork." "Very fast," Lena said. For the first time since she arrived, Judson heard frustration under her discipline. Mara scanned Piper carefully after several patient minutes. No chip. She photographed the white teardrop marking on Piper's chest, the bent tip of her right ear, the sable pattern along her back. Each action was done slowly, with permission borrowed from the dog one moment at a time. When the exam ended, Mara packed her bag but left a small bundle on the bench. Soft food, electrolyte solution, a clean blanket, and a collar made of navy fabric. "No pressure to use it yet," she said. "Just when she's ready." Judson looked at the collar. Small brass tag. Blank. Mara gave a tired little shrug. "I carry extras." Lena handed him a card. "Call me if you remember anything, or if anyone comes around asking about the dog." Judson took the card between two fingers. "You expecting that?" "I expect people to protect themselves when money and licenses are involved." That answer he believed. They left with less noise than they had arrived. The cruiser backed out first, then the rescue van. The road swallowed them, and the shop returned to its older silence. Only it was not the same silence now. Piper sniffed the navy collar on the bench, but did not touch it. Judson picked up the brass tag and turned it in his hand. Blank metal, waiting for a name. It reminded him, unwillingly, of the birthday cards in the drawer. All those envelopes waiting for a son who had refused to be addressed. His phone buzzed on the workbench. For one irrational second, he thought it would be Lena. It was not. Mom. Judson stood still until the call went to voicemail. Then the phone buzzed again, announcing this message. He should have ignored it. That was what he did. That was the architecture of his life. Walls, doors, drawers unopened. Instead, with Piper watching him from the blanket, he pressed play. Elaine Marsh's voice filled the shop, older than he remembered and gentle enough to hurt. "Judson, honey, it's Mom. I heard about the raid at that dog place outside town. Your father heard too. He got real quiet after the news said the name. I don't know what that means, but I thought you should know." A pause. In the background, faintly, there was the sound of a chair scraping against a kitchen floor. Elaine continued, softer. "You don't have to call back tonight. Just be well, son." The message ended. Judson stared at the phone. Piper crossed the floor and placed one paw on his boot. He looked down at her, at the bent ear, the thin body, the eyes that had already learned too much and still wanted permission to trust. The old stove cracked behind them. In the drawer near his chisels, the unopened cards waited like small, sealed doors. Judson did not call his mother back. Not yet. But he did not delete the message. And in the shop that had once been built to keep the world out, that was the first hinge moving. Judson did not like the word permission. He understood its purpose. He respected it when lives depended on order. But there was something about standing outside a place with a sheriff's deputy beside him, waiting to be told where he could step. That put a hard line between his shoulder blades. Bright Ridge working shepherds sat beyond a white fence on a low rise east of Berea, where the fields rolled gentle and green enough to make sin look pastoral. A wooden sign stood by the gravel drive, freshly painted despite the February damp. 2 proud dogs had been carved into it, one German shepherd, one Belgian Malinois. Both posed with bright eyes and noble chests, as if guarding a kingdom of clean straw and honest hands. Below them, in cheerful blue letters, the sign read, "Bright Ridge Working Shepherds Family Raised. Professionally bred, trusted bloodlines." Judson stared at the words through the windshield of Lena Ortiz's cruiser. Some lies wore dirty boots. Others came with serif fonts and a varnished post. Piper sat in the back seat beside him on a folded blanket Mara had brought. Judson had refused a crate. Mara had not argued, only said, "Then keep the leash loose and let her choose contact when she can." Piper's navy collar now circled her neck, the blank brass tag resting against the white teardrop mark on her chest. She had not liked the collar at first, but once Judson rubbed it between his hands and let it carry his scent, she allowed it. Allowed. That was the word Mara used. Not obeyed. Not accepted. Allowed. Judson found he respected that too. Lena parked behind a line of official vehicles near the main building. Her tan uniform was immaculate despite the mud, but there was nothing polished about her face that morning. She looked like someone who had slept badly and made peace with it. Before stepping out, she turned slightly toward Judson. "Ground rules," she said. He gave her a look. "I've heard of those." "I figured. You're here as the person who found and is currently caring for Piper." Mara wants to observe her reactions in controlled areas. "You do not search. You do not touch records unless I hand them to you. You do not go anywhere without me or an officer assigned to this scene." Judson looked past her at the buildings. "And if I see something, you tell me. And if you don't like what I tell you, then I write that down too." For the first time that morning, something almost like approval moved through him. "All right," he said. Mara's rescue van pulled in behind them. She climbed out carrying a medical bag and a clipboard, her hair clipped up in the same crooked hurry as the day before. She looked at Piper before she looked at the property, and Judson noticed the order. Some people saw a case first. Mara saw the breathing thing. The facility was quiet in a way that did not feel peaceful. It had the staged stillness of a room after an argument, when the furniture remained, but the air had been bruised. The main office was a one-story structure with cream siding and blue shutters. Beside it stood a long kennel building, then a feed shed, then farther back, an older barn with weathered red boards and a patched tin roof. Several animal rescue workers moved between buildings with empty carriers, folded towels, and clipboards. Their voices stayed low. No one ran. No one shouted. Whatever had happened before Judson arrived had already been gathered into procedure. That made it worse somehow. Chaos told the truth loudly. Procedure made truth wait in line. Piper stepped down from the cruiser and immediately lowered her head. Her ears shifted, left ear high, right tip bent, both listening too hard. She sniffed the gravel, then the air. Her tail dropped but did not tuck fully. Judson kept the leash slack. Mara watched from a few feet away. "Good. Let her take information. Don't pull her through it. Wasn't planning to. I know." Mara's mouth twitched. "I say things out loud, so my own anxiety has a job." Lena led them toward the main office. "We'll start with the front area. It's already documented. Then Mara can observe near the kennel hall. If Piper gets too stressed, we stop." Judson looked at the painted sign once more before they passed it. Trusted bloodlines. The phrase sat wrong in his stomach. Men had used similar words in briefing rooms, country clubs, hospital boards, churches. Trust, family, duty, tradition, words that should have meant shelter, words that could be trained to stand guard outside a locked door. Inside the office, the smell hit first. Not rot, not filth, nothing so obvious. It was cleaner than that. A sharp disinfectant odor floated over everything, bright and artificial, strong enough to sting the back of Judson's throat. Beneath it lingered damp paper, old carpet, coffee burned dry in a pot, and the faint animal musk no amount of scrubbing could erase. Piper stopped at the threshold. Judson stopped with her. "You don't have to," he murmured. Lena, already inside, turned back. She did not hurry them. Mara crouched beside the door and looked at Piper, not at Judson. Piper's body trembled once. Then she moved forward, pressing her shoulder against Judson's boot as she crossed. The office had been arranged for visitors. Framed certificates on the wall, a corkboard of puppy photographs, a small basket of branded brochures, a glass jar of dog treats on the counter, tied with a blue ribbon. On a shelf behind the desk sat 3 binders labeled health records, breeding lines, and client testimonials. Everything smiled. That was what disturbed Judson most. He had seen dangerous rooms before, but most of them had the decency not to pretend they were nurseries. Lena spoke with another deputy near a filing cabinet, while Mara made notes about Piper's breathing, posture, and responses. Judson stood by the wall, leash loose, saying nothing. He had been told not to search, so he did not. His eyes worked anyway. A calendar with inspection dates marked in neat red circles. A framed photo of a county fair booth. A business card holder filled with glossy cards. A faint rectangle on the wall where something larger had recently been removed. Dust lines on a shelf where binders had sat for a long time and been moved in a hurry. Piper sniffed the base of a closed interior door and pulled back. Mara noticed. "That one go to the kennel hall?" Lena checked with the other deputy, then nodded. "Yes, already cleared." "Can we open it?" Lena looked at Judson. "Ready?" Judson almost said he was never the one they needed to ask, but Piper looked up at him, so he answered properly. "We'll see." The kennel hall beyond the office was long and narrow, painted a pale, washable gray. Several gates stood open. Name cards had been removed from the fronts, leaving tape marks. Stainless bowls were stacked at one end. A whiteboard listed feeding schedules in careful handwriting, too careful, like an actor who had memorized the lines but not the meaning. Piper walked 3 steps in, then froze. Her nose lifted. She turned not toward the open gates, but toward the far end of the hall, where an older door led out toward the rear barn. The tremor moved through her body like wind through a small tree. Judson shortened the leash by wrapping it once around his hand, not to pull her, only to keep the world smaller. Mara's voice stayed calm. "That's enough for this hall." Piper did not move, her eyes fixed on the rear door. Lena followed the line of sight. "The south barn is back there?" "The old red one?" Judson asked. "Yes, why?" "No reason." It was not no reason. He had seen that barn from the drive. It had leaned at a different angle than the rest of the property, older, less eager to look pretty. Mara stood slowly. "Piper is showing stronger stress response in this direction than she did in the office." Lena wrote it down. "Behavioral observation, not evidence." "Correct," Mara said. "It tells us what she associates, not what happened." Judson looked at her then. Mara met his eyes. "Dogs remember through scent and pattern. That doesn't make them witnesses in the way humans want witnesses. It means we should pay attention without making them carry the whole truth." Judson thought of the way Piper had looked at the shed door in his shop. A creature could point toward a wound. It could not be asked to testify about the knife. The sentence stayed with him as they left the kennel hall. In the records room, the air changed. Less disinfectant, more paper. Boxes had been stacked along one wall, some labeled properly, others marked with old dates in fading ink. Lena had Judson wait near the doorway while she and another deputy checked a cabinet that had been tagged the night before. Judson leaned against the frame, Piper at his side. She was calmer here, though not relaxed. Mara stood beside them, letting the dog rest. "Her pulse is better," Mara said quietly. "Still elevated, but she's grounding to you." "Grounding?" "Using you to decide whether the world is ending." Judson gave a dry look. Poor judgment on her part. Mara smiled without showing teeth. "Maybe, or maybe she sees something you forgot was still there." He looked away first. Across the room, Lena pulled a gray file box from the back of a lower cabinet. Dust lifted from it in a soft cloud. The box was older than the others, its cardboard bowed, one corner darkened by old moisture. A red county label had been slapped across the top at some point, then half torn away. Lena read the side. "Madison County Animal Facility Complaints. Archived." The other deputy said, "Those weren't in the current index." "No," Lena replied. "They were not." She carried the box to a folding table and opened it carefully. Judson did not move from the doorway. He kept his hands visible, as if his own discipline could keep suspicion from entering the room. Lena skimmed through forms, carbon copies, letters, inspection notices. Most were ordinary. A barking complaint, a vaccination dispute, a licensing renewal. Then her hand slowed. She pulled a folder from the middle of the stack. The tab read, "Bright Ridge, Special Review, Dismissed Nuisance Complaint," and C. Marsh. Judson felt the room narrow. Lena looked up at him. She did not ask the question immediately. That restraint made it worse. "Judson," she said, "does the name C. Marsh mean anything to you?" The answer came from a place in him older than the scar over his eye. "My father." Mara looked from him to the folder. Lena opened it. Judson stayed where he was. He had been told not to search, not to touch, not to become the man who confused urgency with authority. But every muscle in him leaned toward that folder, toward the past sitting in a paper coffin on a folding table. Lena turned a few pages. Her face changed, not dramatically, but enough. "There are handwritten notes in the margins," she said. "Would you recognize his handwriting?" Judson did not trust his voice, so he nodded. Lena brought one page toward him, but did not hand it over. She held it flat at an angle where he could see. The handwriting was small, slanted, disciplined. The capital C had a hard hook at the top. The numbers were squared off. His father's writing had always looked like it believed the world could be made honest if only the lines were straight enough. Judson read 3 words in the margin. Inspection delayed again. His throat tightened. He remembered Caleb at the kitchen table with files spread around his coffee cup. Caleb rubbing his forehead. Caleb sitting on the porch after sunset. Boots planted on the boards, looking down the road as if expecting someone to come confess. Judson had been younger then, restless, full of judgment the way young men often are before grief teaches them mathematics. He had thought his father was becoming bitter, obsessed, a county employee with a grudge and a box of paperwork. Now the page in Lena's hand seemed to rise like a witness from a grave. Lena read aloud, careful and low. Repeated cancellations of scheduled inspection, facility notified ahead of site visits, medical record inconsistencies, unapproved structural alteration near South Barn. Recommend independent review. She turned another page. Judson saw the name before she said it. Harold Vance. Not bold, not dramatic. Just typed among approval lines and renewal dates, the way certain men preferred to live inside systems, not as villains with torches, but as initials beside signatures. Lena's jaw tightened. Vance was assistant licensing coordinator then. Mara said, 20 years ago? Looks like it. Judson stared at the handwriting. His father had not been silent because there was nothing to say. His father had been buried under paper. The thought struck him with such force that he nearly reached for the page. He stopped himself. His hand closed into a fist at his side, then opened again. Lena saw. I can make a lawful copy of relevant pages once they're processed, but this folder stays in evidence. I know. You sure? No. That was the truest thing he had said all day. Piper shifted against his leg. Her paw found his boot, the same small anchor. Judson looked down. The dog was not staring at the folder. She could not read his father's handwriting. She could not understand county corruption or old humiliation. She only knew that the man beside her had changed, and she leaned in as if to hold him in the present. Judson slowly exhaled. Mara looked toward the window. Beyond it, the old south barn stood under a sky the color of wet stone. Could we observe her outside? From a distance only. Lena considered it. The barn exterior has been photographed and cleared for perimeter movement. No entry without additional authorization. Perimeter is enough, Mara said. They walked out through a side door into damp air. The ground sucked at their boots. The south barn sat beyond a narrow service lane, older than the office by decades. Its red paint had faded to the color of dried brick. One long beam under the roofline sagged slightly. The doors were shut with a new chain, bright against old wood. Piper smelled it before they reached the lane. She did not bolt. She did not make a sound. She simply stopped, head low, eyes fixed on the barn's lower wall where weeds grew against the foundation. Her breathing quickened. The hair along her spine lifted in a dark ridge. Judson knelt beside her. Mara remained standing, observing. Shot same stress response, stronger than in the hall. Nose directed toward the lower south wall. Lena wrote it down, then added, behavior only. Behavior only, Mara agreed. Judson looked at the barn. There were no screams here, no visible horror. Just old boards, mud, a chain, a few bent weeds, the smell of rain and disinfectant drifting from the main building like a false blessing. That was the thing about buried wrongs. They rarely looked like monsters from the road. Sometimes they looked like maintenance issues, filing errors, delayed inspections, smiling signs, a father's notes dismissed as nuisance. Piper leaned forward and sniffed once toward the barn. Then she stepped back behind Judson's knee. He did not ask her for more. Enough, he said. Mara nodded immediately. Enough. Lena led them back toward the cruiser in silence. At the office door, she paused, looking again toward the records room. This is bigger than missing animals, she said. Judson waited. If a county licensing official helped shield this place, my department can't be the only one holding the thread. We'll need state-level support before this turns into a local argument with better lawyers. Vance has better lawyers? Vance has better friends. That too, Judson believed. Before they left, Lena returned to the records room with an evidence technician and arranged for certified copies of several pages connected to Caleb Marsh's old review. Judson did not watch the copying. He stood outside with Piper, letting the cold air cut the office smell from his lungs. When Lena came back, she handed him a sealed envelope. Copies, she said. Lawful. Documented. They're not yours to distribute, and they don't make you part of the investigation beyond what we ask. But given your father's name is on them, I think you should know what you're walking into." Judson took the envelope. It weighed almost nothing. It felt like carrying a door. On the drive back to the shop, Lena did not try to fill the silence. Piper slept in broken pieces beside Judson, waking each time the tires hit gravel, then settling when his hand lowered near her shoulder. Mara followed in the rescue van until the turnoff, then lifted a hand and drove toward her clinic. At the shop, Judson stood in the yard long after Lena left. The day had thinned toward evening. The trees beyond the building were black against a pewter sky. Smoke lifted from his chimney in a narrow, uncertain line. Piper tugged lightly toward the front door, wanting warmth. Judson looked at the envelope in his hand. Inside were pages his father had once written on, pages Judson had never known existed, pages that suggested Caleb Marsh had seen something wrong and tried to name it before the town taught him silence. For years, Judson had imagined his father's quiet as weakness. Now he wondered if it had been the sound of a man bleeding where no wound showed. He took Piper inside. He fed her. He added wood to the stove. He placed the envelope on the workbench beside his folded carpenter's ruler and stared at it until the shadows lengthened across the floor. His phone sat near the chisels. Elaine's message remained saved. Judson did not call. Not yet. Instead, he opened the drawer where her birthday cards lay unopened. He took the top one out, still sealed, his name written in blue ink across the front. He held it for a long time. Then he placed it beside the envelope. 2 doors. One from his mother, one from his father. Piper settled between his boots and the workbench, her bent ear twitching in sleep. Beyond the back wall, the old storage shed waited in darkness. Beyond the town, the south barn waited under a new chain. Judson sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, and realized the life he had built to keep the past outside had failed. Not with an explosion, not with a confession. With a puppy, a folder, and 3 words written by his father 20 years ago. Inspection delayed again. Judson drove to his parents' house with the envelope on the passenger seat, and Piper curled in the footwell like a question he had not earned the right to answer. He had made the drive 1,000 times in memory, and almost never in a life. The road bent south of Berea, narrowing into a ribbon of wet asphalt between fields, barns, and winter-bare trees. Fence posts leaned at odd angles. Crows stood in the grass like black punctuation marks. The sky had cleared after days of rain, but the ground still held the storm, dark and soft beneath the thawing light. Piper lifted her head when the truck slowed near a familiar-looking mailbox. Not familiar to her, of course. Familiar to him. The Marsh house sat back from the road behind a gravel drive, white paint aging toward cream, green shutters faded by sun. The porch had settled slightly on one side. Honeysuckle vines still climbed the posts, trimmed but never fully tamed, and an old wind chime hung near the door. Judson remembered that chime from childhood. Remembered being 10 years old, lying awake during summer storms, counting each soft note as if the wind were speaking in a language only patient children could understand. He parked, but did not get out. Piper placed her paw on the edge of the seat and looked at him. "Don't start," he muttered. She blinked. He sat there another minute, hands still on the wheel, jaw tight enough to ache. He had breached buildings in hostile places with less hesitation than this. He had stepped through doors that might have hidden weapons, men, traps, smoke, death. But the front door of his childhood home looked more dangerous than any of them. Because behind it was not an enemy. Behind it were people who had kept loving him after he made himself difficult to love. At last he took the envelope, clipped Piper's leash to her navy collar, and stepped out. The gravel sounded too loud under his boots. Before he reached the porch, the front door opened. Elaine Marsh stood there with one hand still on the knob, as if she had been listening for him long before the truck arrived. She was smaller than his memory allowed, wrapped in a cream cardigan, silver blonde hair pinned low at the back of her head. Time had softened her face without weakening it. Her eyes, still warm and blue, moved from Judson's face to Piper, then back again. For one terrible second, Judson saw the kitchen from years ago. The fallen glass, the overturned plate, the shock in those same eyes. Elaine did not mention it. She stepped onto the porch, looked up at her son, and said, "You're too thin." That was all. Not "Where have you been?" Not "Why didn't you call?" Not "Do you know what you did to us?" Just, "You're too thin." Judson looked away so fast it might have been mistaken for checking the yard. His throat closed around a dozen useless answers. Elaine came down one step and touched his cheek with her fingers. Her hand smelled faintly of flour and lavender soap. "Hi, Mom," he managed. Her mouth trembled once, then steadied. "Hi, honey." Piper, sensing the emotion before understanding any of it, pressed against Judson's boot. Elaine noticed the bent ear, the cautious amber eyes, the too thin frame. "And who is this?" "Piper." Elaine crouched slowly, not reaching. "Well, Miss Piper, you look like you've had yourself a long road." Piper sniffed the air, then the hem of Elaine's cardigan. After a moment, the puppy stretched her nose toward Elaine's hand. Elaine smiled. "Smart girl," she whispered. "You check first." Judson nearly laughed, but it came out as breath. Inside, the house looked exactly the same in the cruel way old homes sometimes did. The braided rug near the door, the narrow table with mail stacked in a wooden tray. Family photographs along the wall. Judson as a boy holding a fish. Judson in high school wrestling gear. Judson in uniform. Younger and harder-eyed than he remembered being. Elaine had not taken them down. That hurt more than if she had. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cornbread. Sunlight came through the window above the sink, laying pale gold across the table. A ceramic rooster watched from the counter with the smug confidence of a creature that had survived every family argument. Caleb Marsh sat at the far end of the table. For a moment, Judson saw two versions of his father at once. The man from memory, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, hair still dark, boots always clean, county badge clipped to his belt when he came home from work. And the man before him now, 72, thinner through the chest, white hair combed back, hands resting around a coffee mug as if warmth were something he had to hold in place. His flannel shirt was buttoned nearly to the collar beneath a worn canvas vest. A faded Madison County Animal Services cap lay on the table beside him, crown softened by years of use. Caleb did not stand. Judson was grateful and wounded by that in equal measure. "Dad," he said. Caleb nodded once. Judson. The name landed plain between them. No son, no boy, no rank. Just the name of a man who had stayed away long enough to become a guest in his own childhood kitchen. Elaine moved as if ordinary motion could keep the room from splitting open. "Coffee?" "No, ma'am." She gave him a look. "Yes, ma'am," he corrected. She poured him a cup. Piper followed Judson to the table but stayed half behind his leg. Caleb's eyes lowered to the dog. Something changed in him then, almost invisible. His shoulders did not relax exactly, but the hard line around his mouth loosened. German Shepherd, Caleb said. Looks that way. You found her? Roadside, 2 nights ago. Caleb's gaze lifted. Near where? Judson set the envelope on the table. The kitchen became very still. Elaine placed the coffee before him, then rested one hand on the back of a chair but did not sit. Caleb looked at the envelope the way an old soldier might look at a flag folded wrong. Not with surprise, but with the dread of recognition. Judson pulled out the copied pages. Lena Ortiz found these at Bright Ridge, he said. Old county files. Your notes were in the margins. Caleb's hand tightened around his mug. Elaine whispered, Caleb? He did not answer her. He looked at the first page Judson slid across the table, and color seemed to drain slowly from his face. For a long time, no one spoke. The wind chime on the porch rang once. Finally, Caleb said, I wondered if they'd burned all of it. Judson's chest tightened. You knew they might still have records? I knew men like that keep what helps them and hide what condemns them. Sometimes they don't know the difference until too late. His voice was dry, almost brittle, not theatrical. Caleb had never been a man who decorated pain. Judson sat down across from him. Piper settled under the table, leaning against his boot. What happened? Judson asked. Caleb looked at him then. The old blue eyes were pale now, but not empty. You're asking 22 years late. The words struck clean. Elaine inhaled softly. Judson did not defend himself. There was no defense that would not sound like another locked door. I know, he said. Caleb seemed less prepared for that than anger. His gaze dropped back to the papers. He touched the edge of one page, careful not to smear an ink that had dried decades ago. Bright Ridge wasn't called that at first. Same land, different business name, different sign, same family interests hiding behind cousins and partners and limited liability paperwork. Back then, they were smaller, rougher around the edges, not so good at smiling for brochures. He pushed the page back toward Judson. I started getting complaints, not the kind that make a case by themselves. Too much noise at night. Dogs moved before visits, health records that looked copied instead of kept. Buyers saying the animal they received didn't match the paperwork. A neighbor swore trailers came in after midnight, then refused to sign a statement when someone leaned on him. Vance? Judson asked. Caleb's mouth tightened at the name. Harold Vance was assistant licensing coordinator then. Young, clean suit, soft hands, always smelled like peppermint gum. He had a way of making obstruction sound like prudence. Elaine sat down at last. Caleb continued, eyes not quite on either of them. Every time I scheduled an inspection, it got delayed. Weather, staffing, a missing form, a supervisor wanting me to wait for proper coordination. Then I'd arrive, and the place would be spotless. Too spotless. The animals that had been reported weren't there. Records appeared that hadn't existed a week before. Judson listened with the stillness of a man hearing a mission brief about his own family. What evidence did you have? Not enough. Caleb's answer came quickly, sharpened by old humiliation. Notes. A few photographs from a distance. Copies of forms that didn't match, but could be explained away if the person explaining had enough friends. Hearsay from people too scared to sign. Suspicion about the south barn. At that, Piper shifted under the table. Judson felt it through his boot. Caleb noticed, too. His eyes dropped. She reacts to that place, Judson said. Mara says it's scent, pattern, stress, not proof. Mara's right. You know her? Known of her. Good vet. Doesn't turn animals into props for people's emotions. Caleb looked at Piper for a moment. That's rarer than it should be. Piper, perhaps hearing the gentleness under the gravel of his voice, came one step forward. Caleb did not reach down. He only let his hand hang beside the chair, palm loose, fingers bent with age. The puppy sniffed from a distance. The kitchen held its breath. Then Piper placed her head lightly against Caleb's knuckles. It was not dramatic. No music swelled. No wound vanished. Caleb did not weep. Judson did not forgive 20 years in a single holy second. But Caleb's hand trembled as he stroked the bent tip of her right ear. "Well," he said, voice rougher. "Aren't you a brave little thing?" Judson looked down at his coffee. Elaine looked out the window. For a moment the house felt less like a courtroom and more like a place where tired creatures might be allowed to rest. Caleb stood slowly, bracing one hand on the table. "I have something." Elaine's face changed. "Caleb, I should have shown him years ago." "You tried," she said. He looked at her. "Not hard enough." Judson rose half an inch from his chair. "Dad!" Caleb lifted one hand, not angry, only asking to finish. He left the kitchen with the careful steps of a man whose body now required negotiation. Piper watched him go. Judson remained standing until his father returned, carrying a small leather notebook bound with a black elastic band. The notebook was worn soft at the corners. Its brown cover had darkened where hands had touched it over years. Caleb set it on the table but did not open it right away. "This is not evidence," he said. "Not anymore. Maybe it never was. It's memory with dates." Judson sat back down. Caleb opened the notebook. Inside were pages of tight handwriting, diagrams, names, vehicle descriptions, inspection dates, phone numbers, arrows connecting one note to another. Judson recognized the precision. As a boy, he had thought his father wrote like a machine because he felt little. Now he saw the opposite. Caleb had written carefully because he had cared too much to trust memory alone. Near the middle of the notebook, Caleb turned to a page marked with a paper tab. There was a rough sketch of the Bright Ridge property, or what it had been called then. The south barn was drawn as a rectangle. Beneath it, Caleb had written, "South beam, altered floor. Ask EP about backup copies." Judson leaned closer. EP. "Earl Pickens," Caleb said. "Kept books for them. Or pretended to. Man could add columns faster than a bank clerk and lie worse than a child. I thought he knew where the real records were." "What records?" "Payments, transport logs, permit fixes, anything they didn't want in the official file but didn't dare destroy while they were still useful." Caleb tapped the page. "I suspected Earl kept copies for himself. Insurance, if Vance ever decided to hang him out to dry." "Did you ask him?" "I tried." Caleb's mouth bent in something too tired to be a smile. "He disappeared from the payroll before I could pin him down. Then I was called into the county office." Elaine reached for her husband's hand. Caleb let her take it. "They said I had become fixated," he continued. "Said my conduct was creating liability for the county. Said I was harassing a licensed business without sufficient cause." Harold sat there with a folder in front of him and never raised his voice. That was his gift. A man can stab you with manners if he practices long enough. Judson thought of Lena's words. "Vance has better friends." "What did you do?" Caleb looked at him, and there was no pride in the answer. "I fought for a while, filed appeals, called people, drove to Frankfurt once and sat in an office lobby for 3 hours, until a woman told me to submit a form I'd already submitted twice. Then your mother got tired. I got tired. People stopped answering. Neighbors crossed the street because they didn't want to hear about dogs and permits and my trouble with the county. His voice thinned, not from weakness, but from the strain of keeping it level. And one day, I realized they had managed to turn the question from, "What happened at that facility?" into, "What is wrong with Caleb Marsh?" After that, I knew I'd lost. Piper pressed closer to Caleb's chair. Judson's fingers curled around his coffee cup. He remembered being young, coming home from training, seeing his father at the edge of the porch with that same notebook. Caleb had asked him once to sit for a minute. Judson had said he was tired. Maybe he had been. Maybe he had also been impatient with a father who seemed smaller than the world Judson was trying to conquer. That memory hurt worse than accusation. "I thought you gave up," Judson said. Caleb's eyes closed briefly. "I did," he said, "just not for the reason you thought." Elaine's thumb moved over Caleb's knuckles. Judson stared at the notebook. "Why didn't you tell me? You were barely home." The words were not cruel. That made them harder. "And when you were home," Caleb added, "you were carrying things I didn't know how to name. I thought if I put mine on the table too, it might break whatever was left." Judson nearly laughed, not because it was funny, because tragedy, when fully revealed, often had the shape of a bad joke told by a tired god. Two men in the same house, both hiding wounds to protect the other, and calling it love. The old heroic myths should have warned them. Fathers and sons rarely needed dragons. Give them pride, silence, and one misunderstood look across a kitchen table, and they would build their own labyrinth. Piper suddenly drew back. Caleb had turned another page in the notebook. Tucked between two leaves was a folded copy of an old facility sanitation notice. The paper had yellowed, but when it opened, a faint chemical odor rose from it. Stale, sharp, almost gone, but not gone enough. Piper's body tightened. She retreated under Judson's chair, not panicked this time, but clearly shaken. Judson reached down, palm open. "She recognizes the smell," he said. Caleb stared at the paper, then folded it again with care. "They use that before inspections, heavy, like they could drown the truth in a clean stink." He set the paper aside, away from Piper. Judson took out his phone and called Mara on speaker. She answered on the fourth ring, breathless. "Judson, is Piper all right?" "She's all right. We're at my parents' house. Dad opened an old document from Bright Ridge. Same disinfectant smell. Faint." Piper reacted. Mara's voice shifted into calm focus. "Did she recover?" "She moved under my chair. No shaking now." "Good. Don't push her back towards the paper. Let her settle. Scent memory can be powerful, especially if tied to repeated stress. It doesn't mean she understands the document. It means her body recognizes a pattern." Caleb leaned toward the phone. "Dr. Whitcomb, this is Caleb Marsh." A brief pause. "Mr. Marsh, I know your name." Caleb looked down. "Not always for good reasons, I expect." "For better reasons than you were given credit for," Mara said. The kitchen went quiet. Judson watched his father absorb the sentence like a man drinking water after crossing dry ground. Mara continued, practical again. "If the notebook contains locations or names, let Lena know. Don't move too fast. Old notes can help establish probable cause, but they need to be tied to current evidence." "Understood," Caleb said. After the call ended, Caleb closed the notebook. For a while they sat with the kind of silence that does not empty a room but fills it with things finally allowed to stand upright. Elaine rose and cut cornbread, because some ceremonies in Kentucky required no announcement. She placed a plate before Judson, one before Caleb, then set a small piece aside to cool before remembering Piper could not have it with butter, and shaking her head at herself. "See," she told the dog, "you're already saving me from bad decisions." Piper wagged once, cautiously. Judson took a bite because refusing would have wounded his mother more deeply than any argument. The cornbread was sweet, warm, and exactly as he remembered. That was dangerous, too. When the late afternoon light began to fade, Judson gathered the copied pages and Caleb's permission to tell Lena about Earl Pickens and the South Beam note. Caleb did not let him take the notebook. Judson did not ask. Some relics had to remain with the person who had survived them. At the door, Elaine hugged him. He stood stiff for half a second, then folded one arm around her shoulders. She was smaller than the memory he had used to punish himself. War had not made him too dangerous for her. Time had made her more precious. "Call before you disappear again," she said into his shirt. It was half command, half prayer. "I'll try." She leaned back and gave him the look mothers gave sons when try was both insufficient and all they could bear to demand. Caleb followed them onto the porch. The wind chime moved softly above them. He did not hug Judson. Not yet. Instead, he looked at Piper, then at his son. "I never stopped caring," Caleb said, "about that place, about what happened, about you." Judson swallowed. Caleb's hand rested on the porch rail, the old fingers bent, the veins raised. "I didn't quit because I stopped caring. I just ran out of road." Judson had no answer ready. The old version of him might have offered a nod, a hard sentence, something sturdy enough to hide behind. But the day had stripped him of useful armor. So he stood there with Piper between them, the puppy's leash slack in his hand, and let the words reach him without fighting them. The sun dropped behind the trees, turning the wet yard bronze. Elaine watched from the doorway. Caleb stood on the porch like a man who had spent 20 years beneath a verdict and had just heard the first whisper that it might be appealed. Piper sat between father and son, not as evidence, not as a miracle, just warm, living, and close enough to touch both their shadows. Harold Vance did not look like a man who buried things. That was the problem. On the local evening news, he stood outside the Madison County licensing office in a navy blazer, pale blue shirt, and burgundy tie, his gray-brown hair combed neatly to the side. He smiled with the mild sorrow of a man forced to correct a misunderstanding. Behind him, the county seal hung on the brick wall like a blessing. "We all care deeply about animal welfare," Harold said into the microphone. "But we must also be careful not to destroy a local business with speculation, social media panic, or incomplete information. There is a process for these matters, and I trust the process." Judson watched the clip on his phone at the workbench. The copied pages from Caleb's file spread beside his folded carpenter's ruler. Piper lay under the table, chin on her paws, her bent ear twitching at the tinny voice. There is a process. Judson had known men who could make a knife out of almost anything. Wire, stone, a toothbrush, a sentence. Harold Vance had made one out of procedure. Lena called 20 minutes later. "I need the pages from your father's notebook documented tomorrow morning," she said. No greeting, no wasted motion. Especially the South Beam note and Earl Pickens. Dad won't let the notebook leave the house. I'm not asking him to. I'll come photograph it with his permission. Chain of custody notation, witness present. You think Vance knows? I think Vance knows how to count files. Judson looked at Piper. And if he realizes old records survived? Lena was quiet for one breath too long. Then we move faster without getting sloppy, she said. That was the last calm hour. Just after midnight, Judson woke to Piper standing rigid beside his cot, a low tremor moving through her chest. She was not growling, she was listening. Then the sirens came. Not close at first, a thin wail crossing the dark fields. Then another, then a third. Judson stood, pulled on his boots, and stepped to the front window. Far beyond the trees, toward Bright Ridge, the sky had taken on a faint orange pulse. Piper pressed against his leg. No, he said softly. We're not going there. But he was already reaching for his jacket. He did not drive to the facility. Lena had been clear enough about boundaries, and Judson had no intention of becoming one more complication. He drove only as far as the public road, where 2 volunteer fire trucks blocked the way, and a deputy waved traffic back. From there, he could see the smoke lifting beyond the low ridge, gray-black against the moonless sky. Red lights washed over fence posts, wet grass, the pale faces of neighbors standing behind the tape in coats and slippers. No one screamed. No one ran carrying anything terrible. The fire had been contained to the secondary office building near the rear lot, someone said. The animals were not housed there. Rescue teams had already moved the remaining dogs earlier in the day. Judson held to that fact. He held to it like a nail driven clean. Still, the glow behind the trees felt like an insult. Not wild disaster, not lightning, something timed, something chosen. Lena stood near a sheriff's vehicle speaking to a fire captain. Her face looked carved from fatigue and controlled anger. When she saw Judson, she did not wave him closer. She came to him instead, stopping just outside the crowd's hearing. You shouldn't be here. Probably. Any reason you came besides sirens? Piper heard them first. Lena glanced into the truck. Piper sat in the passenger seat, low but watching. Lena rubbed a hand over her forehead. The secondary office is damaged. Filing cabinets were inside. Current files? Some. Maybe duplicate records. Maybe nothing. Her voice made clear she did not believe nothing. Electrical? That will be the first word out of Vance's mouth by breakfast. And the second? Regrettable. As if summoned by contempt, a dark SUV rolled up near the far side of the roadblock. Harold Vance stepped out in a long wool coat, polished shoes sinking badly in the wet shoulder. Even at midnight, he looked arranged. A man dressed for cameras that had not yet arrived. He spoke first to the sheriff, then to the fire captain, one hand resting briefly on each man's elbow in a gesture of public sympathy and private ownership. Judson was too far away to hear the words, but he could read the rhythm. Concern, process, tragedy, caution. Harold turned slightly, and for a moment his gaze swept the crowd. It found Judson. No glare, no threat. Just a mild, curious pause, as if Judson were a misplaced tool on a clean desk. Then Harold smiled. It was worse than anger. Piper made a small sound from inside the truck. Judson looked away first, not because he was afraid, but because some men wanted to be met in the doorway of their own theater. Judson refused to become part of Harold's scene. By dawn, the local radio called the fire an apparent electrical accident. By 7, Harold Vance called it deeply unfortunate. By 8, Lena called Judson and said, "It started near the records cabinets." She sounded as if she had not slept at all. The main breaker box was on the other wall, she continued. Fire marshal won't finalize anything yet, but the preliminary origin doesn't match the public story. Also, the camera covering that entrance lost 23 minutes. Of course it did. A gas station camera on Route 21 picked up a truck leaving the area around the same window. Plate isn't clear. Bright Ridge truck? Similar body style? Not enough. Judson looked toward the drawer where Elaine's cards remained, now no longer alone. Caleb's copied pages lay beside them, thin paper suddenly feeling more fragile than bone. What do you need? Your father's notebook documented today, and I'm sending what I have to someone outside the county. Who? Special Agent Nora Keene, Kentucky Attorney General's office. She handles public corruption and complex fraud when local lines get messy. Does she trust you? No. Good. Lena gave a short breath that might almost have been a laugh. She trusts documents. We'll start there. Nora Keene arrived in Berea that afternoon without ceremony. Judson saw her first at Caleb's kitchen table, where Lena had arranged the meeting with the careful tension of a person trying not to spook old wounds. Nora was in her mid-40s, lean, straight-backed, wearing a charcoal coat over a plain ivory blouse. Her black hair, cut to her jaw, held two clean streaks of silver near the temples. She carried no visible impatience, which was different from having none. Her eyes were pale gray and gave the impression of taking measurements no one had consented to. She introduced herself to Caleb with a nod, not a handshake until he offered one. Mr. Marsh, she said, I've read the copied file Deputy Ortiz recovered. Caleb's mouth tightened. Then you've read what they called me. I've read what they labeled the complaint, Nora said. Labels are not conclusions. Elaine, from near the stove, looked at Nora as if deciding whether to feed her or fear her. Nora set a slim scanner and camera on the table. With your permission, I'd like to document the notebook pages relevant to Bright Ridge, Earl Pickens, and the South Barn. The notebook remains in your possession unless a warrant or subpoena changes that. I'm not here to take your history from you. Something in Caleb's shoulders eased. Not much. Enough. Judson stood by the doorway with Piper, watching his father open the notebook again. The old pages made a dry whisper as they turned. Nora photographed without drama. Lena witnessed. Caleb explained dates, names, old procedural blocks. Elaine refilled coffee no one drank. Piper stayed near Judson until a folded sanitation notice slipped partly from the notebook. The faint chemical odor stirred again. Less than yesterday, but present. The puppy retreated one step, then stopped. Judson lowered his hand. Piper looked at him, then at Caleb. Caleb immediately folded the paper and moved it away. Sorry, girl, he said. It was the first apology Judson had ever heard his father give to a dog. Small as it was, it altered the room. Piper did not hide. She came forward, cautious but willing, and sat beside Caleb's chair. Caleb did not touch her this time. He simply let her choose the distance. Nora watched that exchange over the rim of her camera, and for the first time her expression warmed by 1 degree. Behavior doesn't prove a crime, she said. Mara, who had joined by phone for this part, answered through the speaker on Lena's cell. Correct. But behavior can help us understand why a living animal responds to certain locations or objects. Also correct. Nora clicked one final photograph. Then we keep it in its proper lane. Judson liked her for that. Not because she believed easily, but because she refused to use Piper as a shortcut. The meeting ended with more questions than answers, but the questions now had numbers, dates, and names attached. Earl Pickens, South Beam, altered floor, Harold Vance, canceled inspections, missing camera footage, fire origin near files. A chain was forming, thin maybe, but chains did not need to be thick if every link held. Mara's call came that evening, just as Judson was turning off the saw in his shop. Her voice was different, careful. "Judson, are you alone?" He wiped sawdust from his forearm. "Piper's here." I received a call at the clinic from someone who wouldn't give a name at first. Young woman, scared. She says she used to work at Bright Ridge. Judson looked toward Piper. The dog had lifted her head at Mara's voice coming through the phone. "What does she want?" "To talk, but not at the clinic. She asked if the dog with the bent ear is alive." The shop seemed to tilt very slightly. Judson turned off the speaker and brought the phone closer. "She asked that?" "Yes," she said, "the one with the crooked ear and the white drop on her chest." Piper stood. Judson watched the puppy's amber eyes fix on him, as if some thread in the air had pulled tight. "Where is she?" "Lena is arranging a safe place. Nora wants to be present. They don't want you there unless the woman agrees." "She knows Piper?" "I think," Mara said gently. "Piper may know her." They met after sunset in the back room of Mara's clinic, a quiet space with beige walls, clean floors, and blankets stacked in open shelves. Lena stood near the door. Nora sat at a small metal table with a notebook closed in front of her, making it clear this was not an interrogation until the frightened woman agreed it was one. The young woman arrived in a gray hoodie 2 sizes too large, sleeves pulled over her hands. She was small, maybe 24, with dark blonde hair tied in a low ponytail and eyes pale from lack of sleep. Her name was Maggie Bell. She looked like someone who had been apologizing to empty rooms for days. When she saw Judson, she almost stopped. Lena spoke quietly. "This is Judson Marsh. He found Piper." Maggie's eyes filled at the name before she saw the dog. Piper stood behind Judson's leg, uncertain. Then Maggie crouched, slowly, one hand open on the floor. "Hey, little Pipe," she whispered. The nickname struck the room like a match. Piper froze. Then she made a sound Judson had never heard before. Not fear, not pain, not warning. A thin, broken whine that carried recognition and grief in the same breath. She moved forward 1 step, then another. Maggie began to cry before Piper reached her. "I'm sorry," Maggie whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know where else to put you. I thought someone would find you. I thought if I kept you there, they'd move you before morning." Piper sniffed her sleeve, her fingers, the little key-shaped pendant hanging at her throat. Then the dog pressed her muzzle into Maggie's palm and trembled. No one rushed them. Even Nora did not write. For a moment, the entire case disappeared. Vance, the fire, the files, the old South barn. And there was only a young woman who had waited too long to be brave, and a dog who remembered the one pair of hands that had tried, however imperfectly, to open a door. Maggie told them in pieces. She had taken the job at Bright Ridge because her rent was late and her car needed repairs. At first, she believed the explanations. Busy season, temporary crowding, paperwork delays, dogs being rotated. She told herself she was helping by feeding them, cleaning, speaking softly when no one was listening. Then she noticed certain animals vanished before inspection dates. Records changed. A strong disinfectant was used until the place smelled more like a hospital hallway than a kennel. Staff were told not to ask questions if Harold Vance's office called ahead. She had liked Piper because Piper did not bark for attention. She watched. She waited. Maggie used to slip her extra food and call her Little Pipe because of the tiny whistling cry she made at night. The night before the raid, Maggie overheard two men talking about moving several young dogs before morning. She panicked. She took Piper because Piper was nearest, smallest, easiest to carry without being seen. She drove until she reached a quiet road and left the puppy in a cardboard box near a mailbox, wrapped in an old towel. "I know that sounds awful," she said, shaking. "I know. I left her. But I thought if she was on the road, somebody normal would find her before they did. I didn't know what else to do." Judson looked at Piper, now resting against Maggie's knee while still keeping one paw angled toward his boot. There was no clean hero in that room. Only failed courage, partial courage, late courage. Maybe that was all most people ever got. Nora opened her notebook at last. "Maggie, did you ever hear the name Earl Pickens?" Maggie nodded, wiping her face with the heel of her sleeve. "He used to come by. Older guy. Orange cap. Keys on his belt. He wasn't staff anymore, but people listened when he talked. He said once Harold would burn the whole place down before he let old Paper talk. I thought he was just being dramatic." Lena and Nora exchanged a glance. Maggie swallowed. "He also said if Harold ever tried to pin everything on him, there were backup copies somewhere nobody bothered to look." "Where?" Nora asked. Maggie looked down at Piper. "The old barn," she said. "South side, under the floor maybe. Earl said something about the beam. I didn't understand it then." Judson felt the chain pull tight. Nora did not smile. She closed her notebook with one finger marking the page. "We do not go there on a story and a scared dog," she said. "We need a warrant that survives a judge, a defense attorney, and every friend Harold Vance has." Maggie looked as if she might collapse under the weight of the word warrant. Lena's voice softened. "Your statement helps." "My statement makes me part of it," Maggie whispered. "Yes," Nora said. "No comfort, no lie." Then she added, "But silence already made you part of it. This gives you a chance to decide which part." Maggie looked at Piper, who still leaned against her knee. The young woman touched the bent ear with two trembling fingers. "I'll talk," she said. "But I'm scared." Judson, who had spent years mistaking fear for a private failure, heard himself answer before anyone else could. "Good." Maggie looked at him, startled. Judson's voice stayed low. "Means you understand the cost." Outside, the clinic windows reflected the parking lot lights against the dark. Somewhere beyond town, the burned office cooled under yellow tape. Somewhere in a county building, Harold Vance was likely choosing tomorrow's words. Somewhere in Caleb's house, an old notebook lay closed but no longer buried. Nora stood and gathered her things. "Tomorrow," she said, "we build the chain properly." Piper left Maggie slowly, with one backward glance, then returned to Judson's side. She placed one paw on his boot, her old habit, but this time her eyes remained on Maggie. Judson understood. Some rescues did not end when the box opened. Some began there. The warrant came through at 7:12 in the morning. Nora Keene read it once in her car, once standing outside the Madison County Sheriff's Office, and once more at Caleb Marsh's kitchen table while Elaine poured coffee no one had asked for. The papers did not look like much. A few pages, a judge's signature. Terms precise enough to survive hostile eyes. But in Caleb's hands, It seemed heavier than a stone tablet carried down from a mountain. He sat with the warrant before him, his old leather notebook beside it, his county cap resting near his elbow. Outside the kitchen window, the fields lay pale beneath a low gray mist. Piper sat under the table near Judson's boots, quiet but alert. As if she understood the house was waiting for someone to choose courage. Nora stood near the sink, straight-backed in a charcoal coat, reading from her own copy. The search is limited to the south barn, specifically the structural area surrounding the south support beam, flooring alterations, concealed compartments, and any documentary evidence related to licensing, transport, payment, inspection scheduling, or animal facility records. Caleb gave a dry breath. After 22 years, they finally wrote it down correctly. Elaine touched his shoulder. "You don't have to go," Judson said. Caleb looked at him over the rim of his glasses. "I know." That was all he said at first. His hands looked old around the coffee mug. The knuckles were swollen, the veins raised, the fingers not as steady as the handwriting that had survived him in county files. Judson had known his father as a man who fixed gate latches before breakfast, carried feed sacks without complaint, and believed a record dated and signed could hold the world in place. Seeing him now, small against the kitchen chair, stirred something protective in Judson that felt both natural and too late. Elaine moved to the counter and wrapped 2 pieces of cornbread in foil, because apparently legal warrants, public corruption, and old shame still required snacks. Caleb watched her, then looked back at Judson. "I stood outside that barn once," he said, "with a clipboard and a county badge. I knew something was wrong. I knew it the way a man knows a storm is coming before the radio catches up, but knowing wasn't enough." Judson said nothing. Caleb's gaze dropped to Piper. "If I stay home today, that place gets to be the last thing I obey." Elaine stopped wrapping her cornbread. Then she turned, walked to him, and placed one hand on each side of his face. "There are doors a man can't open alone, Caleb." His jaw worked once. She kissed his forehead. "So don't." That was how he decided? No speech, no grand vow? Just an old man putting on his faded county cap with fingers that trembled, and a son standing beside him without trying to take the weight from his hands. The drive to Bright Ridge was quiet. Judson rode in his truck with Piper in the passenger seat. Caleb sat behind them, notebook secured in a plastic sleeve on his lap. Lena's cruiser led the way. Nora followed behind with 2 state vehicles and a crime scene technician. Mara drove her rescue van at the rear, not because Piper needed a veterinarian every minute, but because Mara had made it very clear that the dog would not be treated like a lantern lowered into a cave. "She shows stress. We stop," Mara had said before they left. Nora had answered, "Agreed." Judson had liked her even more for not making that agreement sound generous. Bright Ridge looked smaller in the mist. The cheerful sign still stood at the entrance, but now yellow tape crossed the drive, and the paint seemed too bright. Like lipstick on a corpse, no one was allowed to call dead. The secondary office building, burned 2 nights before, sat behind the main structure with blackened edges and boarded windows. The fire had not consumed the whole place. It had done what it came to do, then stopped, or had been stopped. That made it feel less like disaster and more like handwriting. Harold Vance was not there. His absence had weight. Nora noticed the way Judson looked around. "He's been informed through counsel. He does not get to attend." "Shame," Lena said under her breath. Nora glanced at her. Lena's face remained innocent. Mara opened the rescue van and took out a soft lead, a water bowl, and a small folded mat for Piper. She wore her teal scrubs under a gray-green jacket, hair clipped badly as ever, face set with the stubborn tenderness of someone prepared to argue with both officers and angels if the dog needed rest. Piper stepped from the truck slowly. The mist jeweled her sable coat. The white teardrop on her chest flashed when she turned toward Judson. Her nose lifted. Her body tightened, but she did not try to climb back into the truck. Judson crouched beside her. "Look at me." Piper looked. Not perfectly, not calmly, but enough. "Nobody asks you to do this alone," he said. Her bent ear twitched. He laid his palm against her chest, feeling the quick bird beat of her heart. "We walk. We stop when you say stop." Caleb stood a few feet away, watching, not with impatience, not with the old authority of a father who corrected. He watched as if his son were speaking a language he had once wanted to learn but never found the door to. The south barn waited beyond the main kennel hall, older than the rest of the property and less willing to pretend. Its red boards had darkened from weather, the lower panels warped where water had risen season after season. A new chain looped through the door handles, tagged the night of the raid. The roof sagged slightly at the long south beam, the exact area Caleb had sketched in his notebook 2 decades ago. Nora gathered the team outside before entry. "We proceed in sequence," she said. "Photographs before movement. No one touches anything until tech clears it. Deputy Ortiz manages local scene security. Dr. Whitcomb observes the dog only. Mr. Marsh and Mr. Caleb Marsh remain with me or Deputy Ortiz at all times. Understood?" Caleb nodded. Judson said, "Understood." Piper sneezed. Mara murmured, "That counts as conditional agreement." Even Nora's mouth moved slightly at one corner. The barn doors opened with a groan that sounded older than the building itself. Inside, the air was cold, damp, and layered with smells. Old straw, dust, mouse trails, metal, faint disinfectant buried beneath years of weather. Sunlight entered through narrow gaps between boards, falling in pale blades across the floor. Nothing dramatic waited in the open. No monstrous reveal. No thunder from heaven. Just an old barn that had held its tongue longer than most people could hold a promise. Piper stopped at the threshold. Judson stopped with her. Mara watched the dog's body, not the barn. Respiration increased, tail low, ears tracking. She's still orienting. Nora did not hurry them. That mattered. Piper took one step inside, then another. Her nails clicked softly against the boards. She moved close to Judson's left leg, so close he could feel her shoulder brush his boot with each step. Caleb came behind them, cane tapping once, then lifting, as though even the cane had learned to respect the room. The south wall lay ahead. Piper's breathing quickened as they neared it. At the third support post, she stopped. Her nose moved along the seam between 2 floorboards. She sniffed, pulled back, then leaned forward again. Her body did not collapse into panic. It fought with memory. That was worse in some ways, and braver in others. Fear standing upright because someone safe stood beside it. Mara spoke quietly into her recorder. Subject dog showing focused scent interest near South Beam area. Stress signs present but manageable. No forced engagement. Nora studied the floor, then the copy of Caleb's old sketch. Caleb stepped closer, his eyes narrowed. "That beam," he said. Nora turned to him. "You're certain?" "As certain as an old fool can be without crawling under it himself." "You're not crawling anywhere," Elaine had told him before they left. Judson almost heard her voice in his head and nearly smiled despite everything. Caleb lifted his cane and pointed, not touching. The original barn floor ran north-south. That section was replaced. See the grain? Different cut. different age. Lena crouched near the boards without touching them. Tech? The crime scene technician, a compact man with gray gloves and a camera strapped across his chest, moved in. Photographs, measurements, marker placement, more photographs. The process unfolded slowly enough to drive Judson's old instincts mad. He wanted action. He wanted the board lifted. He wanted the truth to stop hiding behind procedure and old nails. But procedure had failed Caleb once because corrupt men bent it. Today, procedure had to be made straight. That was the only way it would hold. Piper lowered her head and scratched once at the seam. Softly. Mara looked at Judson. Judson did not encourage it, did not praise it as discovery, did not let the room make Piper responsible for the next step. He only placed his hand lightly on her shoulder. "You did enough," he said. And somehow, that was the moment that changed Caleb's face. The old man looked not at the floor, not at the beam, but at his son kneeling beside a frightened dog and refusing to turn her fear into a tool. Caleb's eyes filled, though no tears fell. Maybe he was seeing the boy who once ran from a kitchen, now staying in a barn. Maybe he was seeing a man who had learned, the hard way, that protection without tenderness was just another locked door. Caleb looked away before Judson could catch him watching. The technician finished documenting the area. Nora gave the order. The first board lifted with a dry creak, then another. Underneath lay not earth, but a shallow cavity framed by old joists. At first, all anyone saw was dust, a strip of rusted tin, and the skeleton of a mouse nest long abandoned. Lena shone a light down. The beam of it struck metal. "There," she said. The technician cleared debris with gloved hands and exposed a rectangular metal box, dull gray, edges taped once upon a time, and now peeling. It was not large, no bigger than a portable toolbox, the sort of thing a person could hide in a hurry and then spend 20 years pretending not to remember. Earl Pickens, Judson thought, a coward's ark. Nora photographed the box in place before allowing it to be lifted. The metal made a hollow scrape as it came free. Piper backed behind Judson, but she did not run. Mara led her a few steps away, gave her water, and let her stand on the folded mat near the barn door. Caleb remained fixed in place. The box was opened on a clean evidence sheet laid across a portable table outside the barn, under the gray morning. Everyone seemed to understand that old paper needed air, but not too much of it, attention, but not celebration. Inside were envelopes, ledger copies, transport logs, licensing forms, photocopied checks, handwritten notes, and folded letters. Some pages had water stains along the edges. Others were sealed in plastic sleeves. Earl had not been noble, perhaps, but he had been careful. Fear, if given 20 years, could become its own filing system. Nora's gloved fingers moved through the top layer. "Payment lists," she said. "Names coded, but dates attached." Lena leaned closer. "Inspection schedule changes." "Copies of permit renewals before approval dates," Nora added. The technician photographed each category before anything was separated. Caleb stood beside Judson, breathing through his mouth. Nora pulled a manila envelope from near the bottom. On its front, in block letters, someone had written, "Marsh report. Do not file." Caleb made a small sound. Not a sob. Not quite. A sound like the last hinge of an old gate giving way. Nora looked at him before opening it. "Mr. Marsh?" Caleb nodded, but his face had gone pale. Inside was a copy of his old report, the same report from the file Lena had found, but cleaner, more complete. Attached to it was a county routing slip stamped, "Not accepted for review." The date matched the week Caleb had been suspended. Caleb reached for the porch rail that was not there. Judson caught his elbow. For a second, father and son stood locked by nothing more dramatic than a hand under an old man's arm. Caleb did not pull away. Judson did not let go too quickly. Nora read silently, then passed the page to Lena for documentation. This indicates the report was intercepted before formal review. Lena's voice was quiet. He submitted it. Yes, Nora said. He submitted it. Caleb's eyes closed. 22 years of being called fixated. 22 years of neighbors lowering their voices. 22 years of a wife saying she believed him while the county taught everyone else not to. 22 years of a son thinking his father had shrunk from a fight he had never been allowed to finish. The paper did not heal all that, but it contradicted the lie. Sometimes that was the first mercy. Piper tugged gently from Mara's side. Mara looked down. "You want to go to him?" Piper stepped forward slowly until she reached Caleb. She did not jump, did not whine. She simply sat beside his boots and leaned her sable body against his shin. Caleb lowered one trembling hand and rested it on her head. Dust drifted through the morning light. Lena looked away. Mara wiped under one eye with the heel of her hand and immediately pretended she had not. Nora, mercifully, focused on the evidence. Judson watched his father and the dog. The image entered him quietly, without asking permission. Piper had been left in a box by a frightened young woman who did not know what else to do. Caleb had been left in a different kind of box, built from labels, procedures, and polite disbelief. Judson had built his own box from shame and called it solitude. Now here they were, standing in the gray yard of a place that had counted on boxes staying closed. The thought was almost funny in its cruelty. The world loved to bury things under wood, under paper, under pride. And then, one day, a dog with a crooked ear scratched at the seam. Nora's phone rang. She stepped away, spoke briefly, then returned with the controlled expression of someone who had just watched several doors open on a map. "That was Frankfurt," she said. "Based on what we have here, this investigation is formally expanding under state authority. Financial records, permit irregularities, potential obstruction, possible evidence destruction. We'll be issuing preservation orders today." Lena looked toward Caleb. Then, not as a deputy speaking to a witness, but as one honest person speaking to another, she said, "Mr. Marsh, your report is going into the official case file." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. His hand stayed on Piper's head. "Spell my name right," he said. For half a second, no one knew whether to laugh. Then Lena smiled. Not widely. Just enough. "Yes, sir." Caleb stood there with his old cap, his cane, his tired shoulders, and the dog pressed against his leg. He did not become young again. Vindication did not smooth his hands or return his career or give back the dinners spoiled by silence. But something in his posture changed. Not pride exactly. Not triumph. Relief, perhaps, wearing the borrowed coat of dignity. Judson saw it, and for the first time in many years, he looked at his father and did not see a failed man. He saw a man who had reached the end of his road and still left a marker for someone else to find. The mist began to lift over Bright Ridge. The cheerful sign by the drive still stood, but its painted smile looked thinner now. The barn behind them had surrendered what it could. The rest would belong to warrants, ledgers, testimony, and time. Judson clipped Piper's leash loosely and guided her toward the truck. Halfway there, Caleb called his name. Judson turned. Caleb stood near the barn door, one hand on his cane, the other still dusty from touching Piper's head. "Thank you," Caleb said. Judson could have answered for what, could have denied it, could have hidden behind a joke, a nod, the old granite face. Instead, he looked at Piper, then back at his father. "We're not done." Caleb's eyes held his. "No," he said, "but we're not alone now." Piper stepped between them, tail low but moving, just once, just enough, and the south beam, which had held its secret longer than a generation, stood behind them in the morning light. Like an old witness finally relieved of testimony. The closing of Bright Ridge did not happen with a single slammed door. It happened in paperwork, in court orders, in frozen bank accounts, in state vehicles parked outside county offices, in phone calls where men who had once spoken with polished certainty suddenly needed attorneys before answering simple questions. That was how the world often corrected itself when it finally grew tired of a lie. Not with thunder, with signatures. The first notice went up on the front gate 3 days after the box was found beneath the south beam. Bright Ridge Working Shepherds was suspended from operation pending state investigation. 2 days later, the suspension became permanent closure. The county license was revoked. The breeding records, transport logs, payment lists, and altered inspection schedules were sealed as evidence. Harold Vance was placed on administrative leave before the week ended, his office door locked, his nameplate still shining beneath the fluorescent hall light like a coin left on a grave. On television, Harold looked smaller without the county seal behind him. He did not confess. Men like him rarely offered the world that kindness. His attorney released a statement about full cooperation, mischaracterized administrative decisions, and respect for due process. Nora Keene read the statement once, set it down, and said, "He likes words that wear gloves." Lena Ortiz laughed for almost half a second. That was how Judson knew she was exhausted. Earl Pickens was found in a cousin's fishing cabin near Lake Cumberland, not hiding well enough to be clever, just far enough away to prove guilt had bad knees. He wore the same orange cap Maggie had described and carried a ring of keys that jingled when Nora's team approached him. At first, he denied everything. Then Nora laid out copies from the metal box, dates matched to his old ledgers, payments routed through shell vendors, and one handwritten note warning that Harold would pin the whole kennel mess on EP if the floor ever opened. Earl began talking before lunch. He was not brave. Judson did not need him to be. Earl confirmed what Caleb had suspected for 22 years. The box under the south barn had been his insurance. He had copied permits, schedules, payment notes, and transport logs because he never trusted Harold Vance to protect anyone but Harold Vance. He had not kept the documents for justice. He had kept them for leverage. Sometimes the truth came out of noble hearts. Sometimes it crawled out of cowardice because cowardice, cornered properly, knew where the bodies of old lies were buried. Judson did not attend Earl's formal interview. He heard enough from Lena later, standing outside Mara Whitcomb's clinic while Piper sniffed cautiously at a patch of melting frost near the sidewalk. Lena leaned against her cruiser, paper coffee cup in one hand, uniform jacket open at the throat. She looked younger when she was tired, as if the job had briefly forgotten to hold her face in place. "Earl says your father was closer than anyone realized," she said. Judson looked toward the clinic window, where Mara moved from one exam room to another, her teal scrub top visible through the glass. Dad realized. Realizing isn't the same as proving. "No," Judson said. "He taught me that late." Lena studied him. "You angry?" "At who?" That list usually starts long. Judson watched Piper. The dog had discovered that frost made leaves taste more interesting, which was a scientific breakthrough no court would record. I was angry before I knew what to call it, he said. Now it has too many names to be useful. Lena nodded as if she understood that better than most. The dogs from Bright Ridge were not magically healed by the closing of a gate. Mara made sure people knew that. At the rescue center, she refused to let volunteers speak of happy endings too soon. There were veterinary exams, quarantine periods, nutrition plans, behavior assessments, foster applications, legal holds, and long afternoons spent sitting outside kennel runs with books no one actually read aloud, because some animals needed the presence of calm more than the performance of it. Some dogs wagged within days, some stared at walls, some startled at metal bowls, some ate only when the room was empty. Mara called progress by its proper name, even when it looked small enough to be missed. A dog sleeping with its back to a human. A dog taking food from an open palm. A dog hearing a door close and not flinching. A dog lifting its head when called. Miracles are usually paperwork and repetition wearing a prettier hat, she told Judson one afternoon. He had been sanding boards for low dog beds behind the rescue building. Piper lay under the work table, one paw resting on his boot, as usual. Didn't know miracles had hats, he said. In Kentucky, everything has a hat. That made him smile, and the fact that it did surprised both of them. Maggie Bell started volunteering on Wednesdays. At first, she kept to laundry, blankets, towels, mop heads, anything that let her be useful without standing too close to forgiveness. She still wore the gray hoodie, sleeves pulled over her hands, the little key pendant at her throat. Some volunteers did not know who she was. Some did and avoided her. Mara did not force warmth. She gave Maggie tasks, expectations, and the dignity of being held accountable without being fed to gossip. Piper saw Maggie on her second Wednesday. The dog paused at Judson's side, ears shifting. Then she walked over slowly and pressed her nose to Maggie's knee. Maggie covered her mouth with one sleeve. "Hey, little Pipe," she whispered. Piper leaned against her for 3 seconds. Then she returned to Judson. Maggie cried anyway, but quietly this time, like someone learning that mercy did not always arrive as a flood. Sometimes it came as 3 seconds beside a laundry cart. The public announcement came 2 weeks after the search. It was held outside the Madison County Courthouse under a sky washed clean by cold wind. Reporters stood near the steps. Local residents gathered in coats and hats, speaking softly, trying to decide whether they had always suspected something or had always been fooled. Human memory, Judson thought, was a witness with a generous tailor. He hated being there. Every instinct in him wanted the back of the crowd, the side exit, the truck parked facing away. He stood behind Lena, Nora, Mara, Caleb, and Elaine, with Piper sitting between his boots in her navy collar. The brass tag now carried her name, slightly crooked because Judson had stamped it himself and refused to redo it. Nora spoke first. She did not dramatize. She listed categories: license revocation, financial investigation, potential obstruction, evidence preservation, animal welfare recovery, witness cooperation. She used language precise enough to bore anyone hoping for spectacle, and sharp enough to wound anyone listening for accountability. Lena spoke next, thanking rescue workers, fire investigators, and citizens who had reported concerns. Her voice stayed steady until she mentioned old complaints that had not been properly handled. Then she turned to Caleb. He had not wanted to speak. Elaine had not pushed him. Judson had not either. But when Lena said, "Mr. Caleb Marsh's prior report has now been entered into the official record. The crowd shifted, and something moved through the old man's shoulders. Caleb stepped to the microphone. He wore his flannel shirt, canvas vest, and faded county cap. His hands trembled, but he did not hide them. "I don't have much to say," he began. Judson almost smiled. In the Marsh family, that sentence usually introduced the most important thing anyone would say all year. Caleb looked over the crowd, not like a man who wanted applause, but like a man checking that the room was real. 22 years ago, I wrote a report. It didn't go where it should have gone. People made their judgments. Some maybe had reasons. Some maybe just got tired of hearing about it. He paused. I got tired too. Elaine stood very still. Caleb continued, I'm grateful the report has a place now. I'm more grateful the animals have a place now. That's all. He stepped back before anyone could turn him into a symbol. Judson did not leave. That was his speech. He stood behind his father while cameras clicked and Piper leaned into his shin, and for once he let the town see him belonging to someone. Life after that did not become clean. It became possible. Judson began going to his parents' house on Sundays. Not every Sunday at first. Sometimes he almost turned around halfway down the drive. Sometimes he sat in the truck until Piper sighed dramatically, a sound so full of judgment that he accused her of being trained by Elaine. The first repair was the back porch step. It's fine, Caleb said. It moves. So do I. That's not an engineering principle. Caleb watched him replace the cracked board, offering unnecessary advice every 4 minutes. Judson pretended to be annoyed. Elaine brought lemonade in weather too cold for lemonade. Piper stole one of Caleb's work gloves and carried it under the porch like a fugitive. No one mentioned forgiveness. It worked better that way. Caleb visited the shop the following week with a box of old tools. Chisels, hand planes, a square, clamps, a wooden mallet darkened from years of use. Thought you might want these, he said. Judson looked inside. These aren't junk. I didn't say junk. You said you were cleaning out the shed. I was. You brought your best block plane. Caleb shrugged. It's temperamental. Judson picked up the tool, thumb running over the worn body. The plane fit his hand as though it remembered the family before the family remembered itself. Thank you, he said. Caleb looked at the floor. Don't ruin it. There it was. Love in the Marsh dialect. Piper trotted between them, carrying a sock she had stolen from the laundry basket, tail low but wagging. Judson pointed at her. That one's your influence. Caleb's mouth twitched. Smart dog appreciates quality textiles. She eats them. Strong opinion, then. It was not laughter exactly, but it was close enough that Elaine, later hearing the story, cried into a dish towel and denied it. Piper's healing moved in small rings, like ripples from a stone dropped into deep water. At Mara's clinic, the sharp smell of disinfectant still made her pause. The first time Mara wiped down the exam table with a milder solution while Piper was in the room. The dog stiffened, ears pinning back. Judson felt his own body respond to her fear. Ready to remove her. Ready to end the test before the world asked too much. Mara raised one hand. Let her decide. Piper looked at Judson. He knelt beside her and placed his hand lightly on her back. You're here, he said. Not there. Piper trembled once. Then she sat, not fully relaxed, not cured. The word cured belonged to people who liked stories tidy. But she stayed. She breathed. She accepted a treat from Mara's open palm and then leaned against Judson's knee. Mara looked at him over Piper's head. "That," she said, "is a victory." Judson nodded, because speaking might have ruined it. Later in the truck, he realized he had been talking to himself too. "You're here, not there." He began leaving the shop door open during the day. At first only a few inches, then wider. The old storage shed behind the shop, the one Piper had scratched at on her first night, became a project he no longer avoided. There was nothing hidden under its floor but warped lumber, a rusted paint can, and a family of mice that objected to eviction with impressive civic passion. Still, cleaning it out felt like answering a question Piper had asked before any of them knew the language of the case. By spring, Judson had turned the shed into a small workshop for rescue projects. He built raised dog beds from pine and cedar. He repaired gates. He made temporary kennel panels. He carved a simple sign for Mara's clinic that read, "Quiet Room," because she said animals deserved a place where no one mistook silence for emptiness. Lena stopped by sometimes with coffee and updates she was allowed to share. Nora sent emails so precise they seemed ironed. Maggie kept volunteering. Earl Pickens's cooperation widened the case. Harold Vance's hearings began crawling through the system at the speed of law, which Judson decided was slightly slower than Rust and only half as charming. No one called it over, but Bright Ridge did not reopen. That was enough to build on. The last scene did not announce itself. It came on an ordinary afternoon with light falling through the shop windows in long gold beams. Judson had been sanding the edge of a dog bed, Piper asleep beneath the bench, her paws twitching in some dream kinder than memory. Caleb's old notebook lay on the workbench. He had brought it that morning, not to surrender it, but to show Judson a page about the original barn repairs. Then he had left it there, while he and Elaine drove to the feed store. Trust, Judson was learning, sometimes looked like an old man forgetting a sacred object on his son's table. Judson set down the sandpaper. He looked at the notebook, then at Piper, then at the phone. The words had been living in him since the day under the south beam. They had moved around his ribs, waiting for the right shape. He had tried saying them in the truck, in the yard, in the shower, to Piper, to nobody. They always sounded too small. At last he called. Caleb answered on the second ring. "Yeah?" Judson closed his eyes briefly. "Dad." A pause. Not alarm, attention. He looked at Piper, sleeping under the bench, the crooked brass tag resting against the white teardrop on her chest. "I wanted to say we did it." Caleb did not answer. Judson forced the rest out before courage could get bored and leave. "I mean, what you started. What they stopped you from finishing. We found it. We got it into the record." His voice roughened. "I finished what you left undone." The silence on the line widened. Then Caleb said gently, "No, son." Judson gripped the edge of the bench. "We finished it," Caleb said. Outside, wind moved through the trees behind the shop, and the old building answered with soft creaks in its bones. Piper opened one amber eye, saw Judson still there, and went back to sleep. Judson bowed his head. There were no medals for that moment. No cameras, no swelling music. Only a man in a charcoal work shirt, standing in a shop that no longer felt like a bunker, holding a phone while the sentence he had needed for years finally crossed the line between father and son. A week later, Caleb came to the shop early. Together, he and Judson hung a new sign over the repaired storage shed. Marsh Rescue Works beds, gates, repairs, temporary builds. Elaine said the name sounded too plain. Mara said plain was trustworthy. Lena said she appreciated a business model that did not require a warrant. Piper tried to steal the screwdriver. The photograph Elaine took that day showed 3 figures in front of the shed. Caleb with his cane and faded cap. Judson standing beside him with one hand resting lightly on Piper's head, and Piper looking away from the camera because a leaf had committed a suspicious movement near the fence. It was not a heroic picture. It was better. It was proof that some doors, once opened, did not lead back into danger. Some led home. Sometimes healing does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a dog that refuses to give up, a father who kept the truth alive, a son brave enough to come home, and one small door finally opening after years of silence. Judson, Caleb, and Piper remind us that broken things are not always meant to be thrown away. Some are waiting for patient hands, honest words, and a little grace to become whole again. So if there is someone you have been meaning to call, a truth you have been afraid to face, or a small act of kindness you can offer today, maybe this is your sign. Thank you for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more stories of loyalty, healing, and hope. May peace find its way to your home, one quiet miracle at a time.